Good afternoon, everyone. We might get started. It's 5 o'clock. If we can please stand for the acknowledgement of country. We would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of our beautiful lands and our surrounding waters, the Ngarrindjeri and the Ramangeri people. As a community, we recognise and we respect their cultural connection with the land.
Almighty God, we ask you to bless this council and allow it to be an agent of change to the people of this city and beyond. Direct and prosper its deliberations to the honouring of your name and the welfare of the people whom it serves. Amen.
Schofield?
My apologies. We gratefully acknowledge the men and women of the Navy, Army and Air Force who made the supreme sacrifice in the preservation of Australians' freedom and democracy. We also proclaim our gratitude to those who return to us.
Thank you. Please be seated. And welcome back to the special council meeting today, which has been called for the 19th of April today. We do have an apology from Councillor Mann. I haven't heard from Councillor Charles, so I presume he's coming. Can I just please remind people of their requirement of disclosure of any material, actual or perceived conflicts of interest in items that are for consideration at this council meeting. If we go now to item 4.1, which is the adjacent owner notification, integrated service station complex. Councillor Hales.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I'd like to declare a conflict of interest for this item. It's a perceived conflict of interest as my cousins are the owner of a direct competitor of said application, being the Liberty across the road, and I intend to deal with my conflict by leaving the chamber.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. I'll do the first recommendation and then I actually might ask Acting CEO Graham Pathouse to talk to the second recommendation before we discuss that. But the first recommendation is to receive and note the report. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Litterly and Councillor Schofield seconding that. Do either of you want to speak to receiving the report? No, does anybody want to speak to receiving and noting the report? All those in favour? That's carried, thank you. I might just ask Graham Pathouse to speak to the second recommendation. And the second recommendation for those people in the gallery who may not have a copy of the agenda on them is that Council, in its capacity as a notified adjacent landowner, grant delegation to the Chief Executive Officer to provide representation capturing the collective position of Council to CAP regarding development application 45308-421 for an integrated service complex at 90 to 101 Victoria Street.
Yeah, thanks. Through the Mayor, I just thought it's worth just quickly prefacing this particular matter by just explaining how we've got to this point. We've not dealt with these things in this manner before, and so what I've got to say at the moment will relate to both this report and the next one as well. So in terms of instances where council become a party by virtue of being notified to a development application, we've generally in the past dealt with that as part of the holistic council administration process for managing the development application, which would ordinarily include internal referrals to our property department or property team, our infrastructure team, or any others that may need to, for whatever reason, speak into a development application. And that then together, along with any statutory referrals to government agencies that may happen, or other notifications to other stakeholders and representations that might come in, that's then assessed as part of the work that the planner would do, the assessing planner would do, which in turn comes together and is then presented for CAP, or the Council Assessment Panel, to make a decision on or a determination on in their role as council's delegate for the decision-making process under the Development Act and now under the Planning, Development and Infrastructure Act. So that's how it's happened in the past. And it's a reasonable question to say, well, what's shifted? So more recently, as a result of the SCAP, now the SCAP is the State Commission Assessment Panel, as a result of their referral to council in two ways for the recent Causeway approval. They referred to council as both a regulatory body on the one hand, as an agency referral, so to speak, but also as an adjacent landowner on the other hand. So it gave council two roles to play. And you may recall that one of those roles, as the adjoining landowner, you delegated to the CEO to provide a submission, and the other one came under the CAP delegations for CAP to consider. And that's how that package of information came together. So putting that thought together with some concerns expressed by a couple of elected members and a desire to speak into this particular one, and I think particularly through Councillor Robertson. At the time, I looked at the methods by which that could happen and provided members with some information as to how that might occur, and the opportunity certainly through the notification process, applying pretty much the same principles as SCAP would have done in terms of council sort of occupying two roles in this particular matter. One as one delegated to CAP, one as an adjoining landowner. But I have to say that brings with it complications as well in terms of planning staff dealing with the matter. If council has a particularly strong opinion about either of these matters, one way or the other, whether it be in opposition to the development or as a proponent, as a supporter of the development, it does put council's planning staff, and council resolves that as a corporate entity, as a corporate body. It does put council's planning staff, and particularly the assessing officer, in a slightly difficult position when they need to objectively assess it against the development plan. Hence, you'll see the reason we put a suggestion that if that happens during the report, within the report, then it actually should be referred to an independent assessment or development assessment consultant or planner that can then help council through the process. So I would encourage that if council doesn't have a prevailing opinion one way or the other, or is perhaps ambivalent about either of these applications, then it would be best for council not to put in a representation as an adjoining landowner and allow it to go through those objective council processes that it normally would. If, on the other hand, council does have a strong opinion and wants to express that opinion as a corporate entity, as the adjoining or adjacent landowner, then I would suggest for either or both of these, depending on what the resolution is, council will also have to commit to enabling us to get some independent planning advice and assessment that will then take the place of the planning staff doing that work. It won't take the place of the council assessment panel making the final determination, which is still an independent body. So I'm just hoping that makes sense as we lead into sort of new territory a little bit in terms of dealing with these matters. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Graham. I'll look for a mover and seconder, and then we may want to, if you do want to go out of meeting procedures for 15 minutes in order to discuss this more fully, we can do that. However, we can stay in meeting procedures, and you can also ask Graham any questions that you have. So, Councillor Robertson, did you want to move this? Thank you. And do I have a seconder for this? Thank you, Councillor Henderson.
Could I raise a point of order, please? Against the meeting procedures, once we have a mover, that person talks to why they're moving it, and then you call for a seconder, and then that seconder then talks to it before we enter any debate. So I think we should stick to protocols, Mayor Jenkins, that we should give the mover an opportunity to talk to why he's moving it, and then if people agree with it, they may second it.
Let me just look that up for you, Councillor Kemp. Please excuse me while I look this up. Councillor Kemp, you're right. And what I usually do is say, would somebody like to move it, and would someone like to second it? Would the mover like to speak to it? Would the seconder like to speak to it? Which I can do either way. The Local Government Act says a member moving or seconding a motion will speak to the motion at the time of moving or seconding the motion. And so that's what I usually do. Would someone like to move the motion? Andrew Robertson moved it. Councillor Henderson seconded it. Andrew Robertson, would you like to speak to it? And then I'll ask Councillor Henderson to speak to it. Councillor Robertson, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Briefly, this is a very high quality and very smart application for the use of the old Stratco site on Victoria Street. It's a great job, but it is laser-like focused on what impacts it's going to have. And if it was to have been on the corner of where, for instance, Victor Landscape Supplies was just shut down its shop up near the end of George Main Road at the roundabout, I think it would be great for Victor. But it's on the inside of the city. It's between the two rivers. Its impact on it's going to be a huge disruption to traffic flow in our city, and we already know that we are struggling on a daily basis with traffic flows, and particularly choke points. And the Inman River Bridge is perhaps one of the greatest, or the most significant, I should say, choke points in this city. So having a new development which is going to increase traffic flows in and out of an area that's just around a blind corner from the Inman Bridge is something that I think would be clearly of little use to Victor Harbor in terms of traffic flows and so forth, because the excellent work that's been commissioned at the back here by Circa, that the work that's been done on that just focuses as though the only impact this development is going to have is on the immediate area of Victoria Street and Oval Road. And of course, its impacts are going to be far greater than that. There are, to me, it is for that particular piece of land, it is a highly unfortunate development for Victor Harbor as a service station and fast food outlet, which is going to dramatically not only disrupt but also complicate traffic flows enormously in the western side of our city. And I think that would be something that I would have expected, as Director Pathouse pointed out, that through the normal processes that this would be something that would be, hopefully would have been picked up by Council's own planning staff, that this proposal here is very, very deficient in that it doesn't look at the bigger picture within a kilometre or so of that service station. It focuses its attention to the few hundred metres surrounding the site. So an excellent presentation. Would be good for the city, but wrong place, wrong time.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Councillor Henderson as seconder.
Thank you.
To speak.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I agree with everything Councillor Robertson has said. I do believe this would be in the wrong position in our city. But in addition to that, the other thing that I'm concerned about is that our residents proudly support independently owned small businesses. And I believe several of those small businesses would be severely impacted in that area with this development. So that's another one of my concerns, apart from all of the things that Councillor Robertson said about the positioning of this particular development.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Glasbrook and then Councillor Littley.
I'd just like to ask a quick question in relation to Councillor Andrews' what he was saying about the traffic flow, is that part of the, would that be part of the assessment when this proposal is assessed? Would they take into consideration traffic flows and that sort of thing? Thank you, Mr. Pethouse.
Yes, through the mayor, that's what would generally happen with the assessment. It'll get referred to our local engineers, our council engineers, to look at traffic flows, traffic impacts, both in front of the site, at the intersections, and more broadly extending from the site as well, as sort of that in concentric circles, if you like, as it ripples away from the site. Not only will it be our traffic engineers, but it's also a Department of Infrastructure and Transport Road as well. So that needs a referral to State Department engineers too.
Follow-up question.
So therefore, if either of those groups decided that this was totally inappropriate for traffic reasons, it would be not allowed, it would be disapproved. Is that the case?
Through the mayor again, could be one of a number of things. It's not necessarily disapproved or disallowed straight away. They could raise concerns that could be addressed by in alternate ways. For instance, if the intersection wasn't sufficient, either one or both of the agencies, being council being one and the department being the other, could request that the applicant upgrade an intersection to make it fit for purpose for that particular use on the corner. Yeah. Obviously, if they can't do that, or if that becomes a pinch point in terms of the monetary factor for the developer, that's a decision then for the developer to make, I suppose.
Councillor Littley.
Yeah, it's my understanding that when we talk about the landscape supplies place, that was the original proposal for this site, but it wasn't suitable there as far as the land use or something. That's where I understood this proposal was going to be, or was targeting. However, we have our empty Stratco site presently in that site, and activating that site would be a great thing. But I feel this proposed development is particularly out of place on that site. My main concern would be the safety. Safety is the highest priority. We have student pedestrian traffic moving through that area, twice a day. The kindergarten is next door, and the idea of exposure to fumes, noise, and notwithstanding the physical danger of traffic movements in and around that area would pose a great danger and put pressure on that kindergarten that's been there for, I went to kindergarten there, so it's been there for a long time. I have environmental concerns, and understanding that there are standards to be met when these projects are put in place, and times have changed and things have improved. But it doesn't mean that there is no risk. With any development like this, there is always going to be a risk. That's on the banks of the Inman River, and you can argue that the Liberty service station is too, but that's been there for many, many years. I don't know that we need to have increase the risk by putting more fuel depositories in that area, wash down areas. We know that service stations and the like, pollutants get onto the surfaces, and we have runoff, and it's a matter of controlling that runoff as well into our waterways. So I don't think that the risk is, well, it would be potentially minimal and they could answer the risk. There is still an increased risk there. Competition. It may not be our place to talk about, have that conversation of competition, but it is the case that if a convenience store like this went into that location, there is an independent supermarket across the road from that. Are we just going to shift one big empty space to another big empty space when those independent supermarkets, independent grocers, bakeries and the like are pushed out of business there? I think we'd be potentially shifting our empty space across to an area that may be even less likely to be able to be used in a positive way. Our city is growing, and it's going to be growing quickly in the near future. I'm sure of that. We know that we've got developments on the way. These type of developments do have a place in our city, I'm sure, but it's not in the heart of our city. It's not between the rivers. It's on the outskirts of our growing city to service those areas on the outskirts, and people coming through and passing by, bypassing our town. We have a ring route There's ample room outside of the town centre for such a development to happen and be serviceable and be a profitable thing and a going concern for these types of investors. I'm not against attracting investors to our city at all, but I don't believe that this is the right place.
Thank you, Councillor Littley. Is there any further commentary? Councillor Kemp?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I guess there's a number of points I like to raise. One is the adjoining ownership, I suppose. Having this type of establishment next to a bit of a scrub reserve on the Inman Rivers most probably doesn't have major effects on the council's property as a adjoining property owner. So I'm sort of a bit interested about that point. But in reality, when we look at what is council's role and things in what we do, I think some of the things we've got to be looking at is that do we meddle in business, in economic strategies development of our city by opposing, development? It may be in the wrong spot, might not be, but CAP will decide that. The DIT will have their say in the traffic management, and so will our traffic engineers. So we go to put up a subject if no one wants to open a coffee shop, we go oppose that because of the number of coffee shops in Victor Harbour. So we've got to be very mindful, what we oppose, not send the wrong message out to the community or the wider community of South Australia or anywhere else that, we will oppose any investments if we don't like the location. I think that it's all about ensuring that, if it goes there and does get the approvals and gets all the ticks in the boxes, it will be done in an appropriate way. But I don't think it's council's role to sit and make judgment on what is developed here, not developed, unless it's within the council's aspect under the planning proposal. But this is going to CAP. They'll decide whether it should or should not go. I just believe that, we should just look at it, and I've read through the reports and the traffic management studies show that, it's manageable. When you look at the previous site of what type of development was there, Stratco, there was semi-trailers moving in and out of that site, vehicles, trucks picking up hardware, cars parking, the emporium around the side, second-hand goods type store, a lot of vehicles moving around that area as well. So it's not like the fear factor of there's going to be a huge amount of more traffic flow. I think, is the street at capacity now? Is the road at capacity? So putting an extra business in there, will it actually extreme that? I don't think so. Yes, it does get busy at times, but I think, with their strategy and why they've done it, I think CAP will decide whether it's suitable or not. As for competition, well, that's what free enterprise is about, is having competition between businesses. We've got two service stations next to each other or close proximity, Caltex and Shell, up around the Port Elliot roundabout. We've got OTR and another Caltex service station. So having service stations together or business together in competition creates benefits to the community. As for the supermarket, I would imagine the convenience store and service station will be more dearer products than what they get at the convenience store across the road. So in those areas, I suppose you could look at it in those different ways. But again, I think it's about ensuring that we don't meddle in areas that we shouldn't be meddling in. And I understand the competition issues around businesses are afraid of a bigger player coming in and competing, but that's what business is all about. So it's really about, we have a mechanism in place to look at this. There are different systems in place with other government departments who will look at this, and they'll make the recommendations as to whether it's the right location or not. I think for us to say it's just the wrong location, just on a feeling, without the proper evidence, I think it's really premature for this council to make a decision. So I'm not supporting this motion. I think we make no comment at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Just before I go to Councillor Schofield and then Councillor Glasbrook, I'll just remind members that if this does go through, the application will not be on competition. So the council can't make comment in relation to any competition that may or may not occur as a result of another development. It is purely in line with the boundary of that being on council land and whether council think that that is appropriate given the vicinity of the application to those areas that Councillor Litterley talked about, being the Harbour Traders Shopping Centre, the narrowness of that road, and the childcare centre, and the greenland that council own that will be adjacent to that. So it's not in relation, I just remind you, it's not in relation to any competition. And as councillors, we are representing the community. And the community have told us that they want development, but they want to keep the character and in line with the community needs. So we need to keep that in mind. And there have been a number of emails from community members in relation to this. Councillor Schofield and then Councillor Glasbrook.
Thank you. Look, I'm not opposed to development. I strongly believe that that's what we need to do in Victor Harbour. I guess my main concern is safety and the traffic. It is not a good site. I mean, you're swinging around from the Inman Bridge. The traffic in that area already can be banked up from Harbour Traders right through to Woolworths, and it doesn't have to be in peak times for that to happen. The extra traffic around a school, in particular a kindergarten, I think we need to be a little bit, you know, conservative when we're looking at that. But really, to me, it is mainly the safety. It is the road itself. I've looked at the plans, and some of the exits into that are so close to the corner. It does worry me, because if you've got 3 or 4 cars trying to get in there and they're banked up, all of a sudden we're banked up past the council chambers. So that are my concern, but I do not oppose development in Victor Harbour. I strongly support it.
Councillor Glasbrook.
Thank you. I won't be supporting this motion. I think the council needs to be very careful, you know, supporting or not supporting a business that's said they want to come into our area. I don't necessarily feel it's our role. You know, as a neighbouring property, I don't believe it's going to have any effect really on our property. I'm not really sure there's going to have a lot of effect on the traffic either, because I don't believe that people are going to specifically go down there to fill their car up with fuel. They're going to be driving past anyway. That's my opinion. Hungry Jacks would have an effect probably, because I believe that'll be very popular. And in relation to feedback, the only feedback that I've received, except from the owner of the other supermarket, was how overjoyed people were that we're going to finally get Hungry Jacks. So I think from my point of view, the community supports Hungry Jacks. But anyway, my reason is I don't think it's not council's role. We've got to be very careful, and we wouldn't normally have the opportunity, and I don't believe that we should take this opportunity out of its proportion. So I won't be supporting this for that reason. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further commentary? Councillor Charles, did you want to say anything?
No, if everybody else has spoken, by all means. Thank you, and I'm sorry I was late. I was going to give an apology for someone else, but they beat me here. So there you go. I've got a couple of questions first. What does the development plan actually speak for this area? Is it a variance, or what's the situation there? Is this acceptable development there?
Through the Mayor, I'm not in a position to make that judgment yet. It hasn't gone through the assessment process. So the process needs to happen first, and then a judgment gets made as to whether it's in variance with the plan or not, and then a determination following that. I haven't assessed it.
Good. All right. If you can't, then you can't. I guess we can all read it for ourselves. But, the other thing, is it a real Hungry Jacks, or is it not a real Hungry Jacks? It's a question that someone has asked me on the street. Is it a make-believe one or a real one?
What do you mean? Can you clarify what you mean by
genuine bona fide Hungry Jacks as we know Hungry Jacks to be, or is it another, just a hamburger place? I know I've read this, I've understood it, but I'm a little bit in doubt myself now after all of that. I know it's a separate building, it has a dining room, has a kitchen, I've seen it all, the layout. Stupid question, but I think it's worth answering. Do you know, Jack?
Through the Mayor, I know nothing more than what's in the application. So in terms of Councillor Charles having read and understood it, that's about as much as I know as well.
They are. Anyway, the character of the site right now, what would you say it is? It's an absolute disaster, and it's been a disaster for a long, long time. That's my first point. We as a council got a responsibility to speak up and bring out and tease out some of the issues. That's one thing that we do have to do. And we have to make suggestions and make improvements where we see it, because we know the area ever so well. The architect and the people who have looked at it, they've looked at it from, you know, a new arrival's eyes, if you like. And as I've said in an email, and it's been expressed in a different way, is the intersection fit for purpose? And certainly it's not the way it is. The whole location already is under strain. There's no argument about that. And I've suggested that council makes a recommendation somehow, some way, that to Deputy, whoever it is, the state government, that the intersection be updated at these people's, or with their support, their expense, or with a contribution to a roundabout would be ideal. Look, we look across the road and we've got Bridgestone tyres with an entry which stops traffic for people to turn around to Pine Tree to drive in. It's a stupid location. They should have come in from the back street and exited onto Victoria Street, but that wasn't thought of when they put that development in there. So rear end accidents probably haven't occurred there. I wouldn't know. We'd have to ask the police, but people stop and start on that road constantly. I would like to see a walking path, because this is what we're talking about. We're lucky enough to be able to make some sort of contribution because of the fact that we've got a park right beside it. Otherwise we wouldn't have an opportunity to. We wouldn't even take the opportunity to do it, I'm sure. But I'd like to see a walking path along the river behind this property and coming out in Oval Road, walking, riding, bike path. If we don't get that, I think we should try and establish one anyway, perhaps down the embankment a little bit, so it may well still be on the land that we can put a bike path on, but so people can pass through the back of the property rather than walking around the property where cars are coming in and out and so on. That will allay some of the problems. I was going to mention semi-trailers, all that sort of thing too, but there's absolutely no need to do that because we all know that, that it's not a top spot at present moment. The plans talk about landscaping on the riverside and the dining room. This has certainly got nothing to do with us, but I'd like to see them turn their building around. The dining room face out towards the Oval to the river for a beautiful view whilst people are there looking out over their landscaping, and they just need to move the kitchen around the other way. It's all very doable, rather than looking at Victoria Street. Other than that, I've got very little else to say. I certainly have sympathy, lots of sympathy for a young family who run a service station who will have to compete with us. I guess that's all we can really say. But there's not much we can do. If the development plan offers the opportunity, all things are looked at, and well, there's really much else that can't be said. You know, I've been in the same experience with competitors coming into town in a big way. This will be a big one. I suppose I should also mention, look where McDonald's is. Look at the glut there when people turn the corner to line up to drive through there. They don't even pull to the middle of the road. Cars can't get around behind them to go up Seaview Road. We've got a lot of problems in this town, and it's not because of the development, it's because of the layout. And we can't do much about it because that's back to the topography. We've been through that time and time again.
Thank you, Councillor Charles.
I have a question, please, Mayor Jenkins.
A question, Councillor Kemp?
Thank you. Whether the vote goes either way, the problem I see is that we're voting for this administration to provide some type of feedback as part of the council's position, but we don't know what that feedback will be. Is there any indication as to what will be stated in response to the cap about if it's opposed or not opposed? Because I think we should know what we're voting on as to what's going to be said, because we may not agree with what the administration puts up.
Through the mayor, I would like to see the council, if it proceeds with a submission based on the conversation tonight or the debate tonight, to formulate what its collective position is, so that we've got direction. So I have direction as to what we submit into the development application or into the response. I've made a number of notes about various themes. I'd certainly like to see that consolidated into a resolution, whether it's part of this one or a subsequent resolution, if it gets to that point.
What I might do, Councillor Kemp, is if the recommendation is passed, before we move on to the next item, just open it up for some debate, 15 minutes of discussion where you can put to Director Pathouse some of the issues that you would perhaps like raised in the submission. If that passes. If it doesn't pass, then obviously you don't need to do that. Councillor Robertson, would you like to close the debate?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. It's been a good debate. There's a lot of good points being made by different members. There's clearly 2 points of view here across a wide range of issues, everything from traffic and various environmental issues and safety issues. I think that it's going to be whatever people think they are, but from my point of view, the most common thread we had there was the issue of the traffic flows and management, and the very, very limited options there is to ameliorate or mitigate those problems in that particular part of Victoria Street. And so, yeah, I think the debate's been a good one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Robertson. I'll now put the recommendation to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried. Thank you. I might just ask Graham to just perhaps outline the dot points that he's got from you, from the debate, that he would like to put into the recommendation. Are you happy for us to go out of meeting procedures for 10 minutes? Can you raise your hand if you are? Thank you very much. So Graham, can you just outline those dot points?
Through the Mayor, the general dot points I have are that disruptions to the traffic flow, mostly around traffic intersection, fit for purpose, those sorts of words, and it will create a much greater impact on those intersections in the road and the intersection at Oval Road, and not just immediately adjacent to the site, but further along those roads as well. Commentary around it's in the wrong position in the city, and it shouldn't be between the river and located on the outer edges of town would be appropriate, more appropriate.
Vicinity to the childcare centre, and also you've got flow across the road, the flexible learning options school.
Yep, correct. So that came under environmental concerns that included fumes and noise and impacts that might have on neighbouring sensitive uses, such as the kindergarten and the school, and school children walking past that. Other environmental issues were around the Inman River and just the location of the proposal along the Inman River. Competition with local suppliers was an issue that was raised.
Is there anything else
I
that you would
think
like,
that pretty,
Graham to put in, or does that cover it?
pedestrian access around the site and through the site, or,
Yep.
yeah, around the perimeters of the site.
Yep. Councillor Charles?
Couple of things. I'm glad you're doing this. I was almost going to have to frame them in questions to get the message through. But I understand that I didn't say a roundabout, but that's what I wanted to say. Or if I did, I didn't say that they provide some of their land to be able to build a roundabout of a minimum size, because I believe there is a minimum size. We've got a very big one there at Crozier Road. We've got a smaller one at Seaview Road. And at one time it was said, whether it be correct or not, that a roundabout couldn't be put there because there wasn't sufficient space, it would be too small. So if they'd be prepared to throw some of their land in for that to happen, that would be ideal. And speaking of Blind Corner, as soon as that big sawmill shed goes, it'll no longer be a blind corner. You'll be looking through the park if it's tidied up a little bit. And it's going to be a very, very pleasing site. It's going to be very, very pretty, I would suggest. I think that's all.
Thank you. Councillor
Thank you.
Robertson?
Yes, Mayor, I think that, as I mentioned before, this is an excellent development. I think it's a great job that's been done by the architects, the road people, and the potential proprietor as well. A high quality proposal. I just wish it was on the edge of town, and because and I think that a proper traffic study by our own engineers and those from DIT would highlight the issue that in that particular location, given the minimum flows of traffic which they are expecting, if you look at their calculations there, that it's going to have huge impact all the way back to the roundabout just on the corner of our own council chambers here, and also further down into the Victoria Street. I don't believe really that a roundabout at the Oval Road interface will have a lot of make a lot of difference, because the choke points are going to occur west of the blind corner and east of the car wash. So I look forward to the weakness in this development application is that it just focused on that the immediate road frontages that were on the property's edge.
Thank you. Councillor Lidley?
I'm just going to reiterate the safety thing again, and I take on board what Councillors Kemp and Glasbrook said about, we should stay out of this. But my community, the people that voted for me, would expect me to speak up and talk about it, because it is a real concern. In this chamber, I'm the only councillor here with a school-aged child, 11-year-old, 12-year-old. I know the kids. I know how kids move in traffic situations, and to me, this development in this site is a disaster for a parent of a young child or a child. They don't walk like we walk on roads. They simply don't. I look at this development plan and I know it's all done with traffic management in place. It's probably done with studies on pedestrian movement of all kinds. But I look at that and it's a maze, and you've got a Hungry Jack's store there, smack bang in the middle, opposite a road where there's kindergarten children, where there's high school children, and they're not, they're in high school, they're not particularly old, and they're getting younger because they're moving up, year 7s are moving into high school. I grew up knowing of a young girl as a 4-year-old who was run over in a drive-through car park and was paralysed for life. So I'm just saying, I'm speaking out that I don't see this as a fit for purpose development in an area that it's in that area that it is, and safety is that main concern. Traffic movement, pedestrian movement, that's why I'm opposed to it.
Thank you. Our 10 minutes of speaking out of meeting procedures are up. We have hands up to go back into meeting procedures. Thank you very much. We now have a third recommendation, and that is that council increase the 2021 budget line by $5,000 for an independent planning assessment of Victoria Street. And Graham gave you the reasons why that should be an independent assessment rather than come from council officers themselves. Before we go into the next one, all right. Graham's just said, Karina's just given a dot point of the concerns that you raised. What we might do before we go to that third recommendation is perhaps do another recommendation that the collective position is that council has concerns regarding the following elements and that to be put into the feedback that council gives. So we can do that, and if you'd like Graham to speak to that, he can. But if I can have someone to move that way. Thank you, Peter, and seconding Brian. Do you want to speak to it, Peter?
Just to say that when all is said and done, we will have no impact on this at all. These are just recommendations and things that we see that are going to go to them just to help them make a decision. That's all this is about tonight. We can't do anything else.
Yep, thank you. Councillor Littley, do you want to say anything to that, those dot points?
Just reiterate what Councillor Charles said then.
Yeah.
It's just advice from people that know the situation and know the place.
Yeah.
And know the people that are in this community.
Are there any questions for Director Pathouse? Any commentary? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now go down to recommendation 3, that council increase the budget line for an independent planning assessment of 90 to 101 Victoria Street. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Henderson, thank you. And seconded by Councillor Littley. Councillor Henderson, do you want to speak to that? Councillor Littley, do you want to speak to that?
Money well spent. It shows that we're doing something in our community and we're thinking about this and not just letting people move in. It's money well spent.
Thank you. Does anybody have any commentary about it or any questions for Director Pathouse? In that case, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you very much. Is that all, Graham? You with that one? You're happy with that? So we now move on to item. I'll just get Nick. I think he's out with this one as well. Fails. This is item 4.2, adjacent owner notification, variation to apartment complex at 21 to 29 Flinders Parade. Councillor Hales.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. As Council's representative on the Council Assessment Panel, I would like to declare a perceived conflict of interest. I could either speak to it as it's before Council now, or I can do my duty on the Council Assessment Panel, and I will choose to do it at the Assessment Panel. So I'll declare a perceived conflict of interest and leave the chamber for this item.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. The first recommendation is that Council receive and note the report. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Schofield, thank you very much. And Councillor Charles, thank you. Would either of you like to speak to receiving and noting the report? Would anybody like to speak to that? All those in favour? That's carried, thank you. The second recommendation is that Council, in its capacity as the notified adjacent landowner, grant delegation to the Chief Executive Officer to provide representation, capturing the collective position of Council to CAP regarding development application for a variation to an apartment complex at 2129 Flinders Parade. Do you want to speak to that, Graham, at all? Enlarge the report.
I will take the opportunity, if that's okay, through the Mayor, just to reinforce again that if Council doesn't have a strong position one way or the other, it would be more prudent, I think, to allow it to go through the development assessment process. Obviously, this one is a little bit different in that it represents an application that's already gone through that process, and the current application now is an amendment to that application that provides for an increased site footprint. Leave it at that. Thanks.
Would someone like to move recommendation 2? Thank you very much, Councillor Robertson. And a seconder, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Robertson, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. On this occasion, I think we should not have a position to go on this particular application. It's a high quality application. It's one we've all been waiting for a long time. Hopefully it's the last time that this particular project goes through the assessment panel process. Even though I'm moving this motion, I will not be voting for it. As I note in there that there's very little in this application about the car park, and I've read through all of the bits of it, and it talks about a car park plan that was previously approved. That I'm not sure which one that is, or indeed if we've seen it. But as for the issue in front of us here of having a position on this, I will not be voting for any council having a position on this particular application.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Councillor Henderson, do you want to speak to this? No. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Glasbrook.
Yeah, thank you. I won't be supporting this for the same reason that I didn't support the last one. I don't believe that it's council's role. It'll go through a very thorough process, the same as the last one, and it'll be judged on its merits. I just wanted to make a comment because I get frustrated with council. It's interesting this is even here. It didn't come to council for its original approval, and yet now it's miraculously here. I'm not, in my 6 years, it's never happened before. I feel that the last one was just brought upon, by pressure from individuals in the community, and I don't believe that, I still don't believe it's appropriate for council to be saying what should and shouldn't. If people are willing to come down and invest in our area, as long as they comply with the rules and regulations, we really shouldn't discourage them. That's my opinion. So, and it's unusual that this has come to us when it didn't come to us in the first time, and it's not come to us in the past, to my knowledge, and I just wonder why.
Yeah, Graham, would you like to explain why this came here?
Yeah, through the Mayor, I think I explained that at the start of the last item, how this has come about and why it's now in front of you. Well, that was particularly in relation to the last one. The reason this one is here is the timing is such that this application was also notified, and council also happens to be an adjacent landowner. So purely for the sake of consistency with the approach applied to the last one. Thinking more broadly and looking more broadly, it seems clear to me that for this type of situation or circumstance that council now finds itself in, it would be perhaps prudent to have some level of policy approach to that, so that our staff can have a direction as to how council feels it might be best to deal with this. But that's probably something we need to deal with at a later stage.
Thank you, Graham. Yes, I agree. I think I think having a policy where we look at whether or not council put in submissions if we've got adjoining land or have something to say is really important, so that we've got a standardised approach for all of this, rather than being reactive, we're being much more strategic. So I think that's a good idea. Brian, you want to speak to this?
Yeah, really quickly. Again, I agree, Councillor Glasbrook, that there hasn't been done before and it has to be consistent. And I think there's nothing lost out of this process, going through this process now. For the previous item, we did have members of the community approach us and ask us, and we've listened, we've taken it on board, and we've had that discussion. This is a case of timing, I think. And I agree, I won't support this. I think it can go through, but we haven't lost anything by having the conversation and looking towards, we might come up against this in future when the planets align and we need to discuss another matter before and another one comes up at the same time. So nothing lost.
There any further commentary before Councillor Robertson? You'll close the debate if you speak at the moment. You can ask a specific question.
Sorry, a question to Director Padhouse. A very good subtle point that you made, Director, on the issue that we're in a new planning environment, one where we as a community are going to perhaps have way less say over what's happening in our city than we would have had in the past.
Sorry, what's your question, Councillor Robertson?
If I could just add a few more points here before I come to it, it won't be long. And so in that situation where...
Can I have a point of order, please? Councillor Robertson's had his opportunity to speak without a question. We always get an opportunity to ask a question. He's just said straight out that he wants to make some more points.
Councillor Robertson, can you be quite, keep your preamble to your question quite short? And I know that you do have difficulty doing that, but if you could keep it quite short and be quite specific in terms of your question. So can you ask your question to Graham Pathouse?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I don't appreciate the comment you made there about I may have difficulty formulating a shorter question. That can happen from time to time.
Yeah, no, shorter preamble. This is not a time for debate, Councillor Robertson. You can talk to me about it afterwards. What is your question to Director Pathouse?
Subtleties go past a lot of people. Mayor, okay, I'll ask the question of Director Pathouse. Do you think that it's a good thing now that these development applications, particularly the more important ones, come in front of council so that the elected members have an opportunity to provide local input into the process? Of course, it's up to the assessment panel to take their own view, but given that we're more and more divorced from the assessment panels, that we have that opportunity.
Is that your question? Thank you. Can you answer the question, please?
Through the Mayor, it is a difficult question to answer. Is it a good thing? The way that this state is heading is a much more independent from council approach to how it deals with planning assessment. There's good reasons for that because of issues that it's had in the past with councils getting involved in areas that they're perhaps not equipped to get involved with, albeit that they can speak into local issues and local insights. That's part of the reason why there's still a council elected member on the CAP panel. More broadly, though, the focus for council needs to be on the higher order strategy that gets the support for that right. I think under the new planning system, that's probably becoming a bit more difficult for councils as well. So I'm sitting on the fence a little bit, Councillor Robertson. There's probably complications for both ways and arguments for either and or as well.
Thanks, Graham. Is there any further commentary? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. First question to Mr. Pathouse. If we're adjoining property owner, what impact of this development will have on us as adjoining property owner? What are the issues? because that's why we're making a comment, back to CAP.
Through the mayor, I haven't identified any particular issues that council might have.
Fair enough.
Hence the ability for elected members to identify issues if they feel they have them.
Fair enough. I just thought because it's come to the chamber, there would have been some type of rhetoric around if there was any problems being a adjoining landowner. If we had a policy in place, I can see the relevance of this agenda item being here, but I don't see the relevance because in principle already it's gone through the process of being approved. It's just an amendment to the size of the footprint. As a council, we support and working with the owner of the developer to look at a car park. So again, I don't see why it's here. I just don't see the value of it. We haven't achieved anything because we can't even identify what the issues are as adjoining landowners. So you just got to wonder why. I think I won't be supporting it because of those reasons. I think if we do have a policy in future and for that reason to come here, sometimes I just think, is it really relevant to have that type of information coming to us? Because if it's going to CAP anyway, they're the final decision makers, and whether we have input or no input may make no difference anyway, because they'll do it on merit anyway on the application. So, but I won't be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Is there any further discussion? Councillor Charles.
I thank you for that. This, because we have some land adjacent to, gives us once again an excuse to make some comments, and it will be passed on to probably the right ears, regardless of whether we carry this motion or not. Because sensible people will listen to sensible ideas and they'll get passed on somehow or other. So I just want to say that I believe the council should give our greatest positive support for this particular thing. That would be all I would say we need to say. This car park is becoming more and more essential as we wipe off car parks in this township with our main street and, the revamp where car parks are made correct as far as Australian standards are concerned, and we lose some because they were previously too small and because we've got more space for people rather than motor vehicles. The car parks are central to a number of our developments that we're thinking about having or may have or may not have, depending on support and funding and who supports this and who supports that. That's, I think, my point's made. I think that's the essential thing, is that we are real keen to support this. The car park is absolutely essential, as we've got a lovely sketch of it here. I just hope that good communication is going on with the developer from here, and it's all the support we can possibly give. And regarding points of order, there are 3 opportunities to have points of order. One is if there's bad language. The other one is if there's a
Points of order,
contravention of the Act. And that
Councillor
was not a point of
Charles,
order.
that was a point of order. You are not talking about the motion.
Why was it a point of order?
Because you are not talking about the motion and you need to concentrate on the motion at that time.
That is not in the Act, I'm afraid.
I'm ruling a
Point of order.
Thank you. Good on you, Brian.
Would somebody
Thank you.
read the Act, please?
We can talk about it afterwards. I am aware of the time and we have one more item to go. If there's no further, Councillor Robertson, do you want to close the debate or can we go straight to voting?
We should go straight to voting, Mayor.
Thank you. I'll put that recommendation to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That recommendation is lost. And I'd just like to say we wish the Anchorage and the development the best in Victor Harbor. And in answer to one of your queries, Councillor Charles, the CEO is meeting on a very regular basis with the Anchorage and the developer with Director Pat House and offering them as much support as we possibly can. It's something that the council really wants. We now move on to item 5, which is confidential. And pursuant to section 90.2 of the Local Government Act, the council orders that all members of the public, except for Graham Pathouse, Acting Chief Executive Officer, Karen Rotoczynski, Kelly Knight Stacey and Karina Overall, be excluded from attendance at the meeting for this agenda item, confidential information land for sale. The council is satisfied that pursuant to section 93B and J of the Act, the information to be received, discussed or considered in relation to this agenda item is information in which disclosure, I need to move, for the public's sake, Councillor Schofield, I need to move, read it all out. Information into this agenda item is information, the disclosure of which could reasonably be expected to confer a commercial advantage on a person or entity with whom the council is conducting business or proposing to conduct business, and would prejudice the commercial position of council, and would divulge information provided on a confidential basis by SA Water relating to the land disposal. In addition, the disclosure of this information would, on balance, be contrary to the public interest. The public interest in access to the meeting has been balanced against the public interest in the continued non-disclosure of the information. The benefit to the public at large resulting from withholding the information outweighs the benefit of disclosing the information. The council is satisfied that the principle that the meeting be conducted in a place open to the public has been outweighed in these circumstances. Would someone like to move that recommendation? I beg your pardon, Peter Cookson and Kathy Hayter are also allowed to stay. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Henderson and seconded by Councillor Littley. Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Henderson? Councillor Littley? All those in favour?
I'd like to speak, thank you, against it.
Oh, you'd like to speak against it,
thank you.
Councillor Kemp?
I'm not supporting this in confidence motion due to the fact that when you read the document, SA Water has put it out to the public realm what they want. So why are we going into confidence when it's out there anyway and people know about it? So I don't see the benefit of us going to confidence to discuss something which is already out in the public realm.
Or
Through the Mayor, the purpose of going into confidence is that if council is in a position that it wants to negotiate, by virtue of doing that this evening and perhaps making some decisions around that, the public nature of that would effectively show council's hand in the negotiation to other parties that may also be interested in the land.
thank you, Director Pathouse. That's a very good point. Does anybody else want to speak to this? I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you very much. We'll just wait until